This video is going to cover the topic of tree diagrams and probability tables. Be sure the date and topic are at the top of your page. The essential question will be, how do we organize the outcomes of compound events? Before we go too far, we want to make sure we know what a compound event is. And a compound event is when we're looking for the probability of more than one event happening at the same time. And I'm going to show you some examples of what I mean by that. So let's say, for example, there's a carnival game, and to win, the player needs to flip a coin and spin a spinner, and they need to predict the result that they get correctly to win the game. So maybe they choose tails, right? You can see I have tails here, and they have chosen that they will land on red. So we have to figure out the probability that they get a tail and a red at the same time or within the same turn. And we'll start with the coin. For the coin, they can either get a heads or a tails, and I'm just listing out the two options here. They can get heads or tails, right? Once that part of the turn is done, they spin the spinner, and there are three possible outcomes for that. There's a red, a green, and a blue. And I'm going to record that if they get a heads, they could get red. I'm going to use R here. They could get a green, or they could get a blue. Those are their options that they could get. The same thing is true for if they get a tails. They could get a tails with a red, a tails with a green, and a tails with a blue. And now I just want to record all my combinations. So there was a heads with a red, a heads with a green, a heads with a blue, a tails with a red, a tails with a green, and a tails with a blue, right? Those were all of their choices. Since they chose tails and red, the only way for them to win is right here, right? If this is the combination they get. Now if I look, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different outcomes, and only one way for them to win, so their probability is 1 out of 6. In fact, each one of these, the probability is 1 out of 6. What we just made here is called a tree diagram. They call it that because, well, it has branches like a tree, right? Things coming out. And if you turn it on its side, it's a little bit like a tree spacing. So tree diagram is just one of the options, and I happen to like this a lot, but you can also make a table to make your pairings. So this table is pretty basic, right? Just a little T-chart here. And I'm going to list all of the pairings, right? So the first thing I can do is I can get heads. But when I think about what I could get on my second part of my turn, I could get red, green, or blue. So I'm actually going to have to write this a few times. But first, let me just write the first option, right? Heads and red. That's option 1. But now here are the options, heads with a blue and heads with a green, right? Those are all the things I could get after I've flipped my coin and landed with heads. Now I have to think of what would happen if I had gotten tails. So again, I'm going to put tails on one side. And one possible outcome with that tails is that I then spin a red, but of course I could also get green or blue, so I need to write those options as well. And just like with the tree diagram, I can see all of my different options here, right? I could get a heads and a red, I could write that over on the side, I could get a heads and a blue, and so on. And I just make sure that I have all of my options, and then the same thing, I can count how many options there were to figure out the probability of each one occurring. There are 6 different outcomes, so each one of these, which is equally likely, is 1/6, right? There's 1/6 probability for any of these happening. Here's another quick example, right? The probability of getting 2 tails if I flip 2 coins. So I know the first coin I get, I could do heads or tails. And I'm actually going to label my tree diagram a little bit more here. And that's just to keep it more organized, to make some nice little columns here. But I know I can get heads or tails with coin number 1. And then from there, with coin number 2, we can either get a heads again or a tails. And if we got a tails the first time, we could get a heads the next time or another tails, right? So then when I look at my outcomes, I can get a heads, 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 tails. Oops, wrote that in the wrong order there. Tails, heads, or tails, tails. And I was looking for the probability of getting 2 tails, and that happens to be right here, right? There are 4 options, and only one of them satisfies what I'm looking for, and that also makes it 25% chance. So there's 25% chance of getting 2 tails when I flip my 2 coins. These trees or these tables, we could do either one, you could use for three options as well, right? Three events, three compound events happening. So let's say you're getting dressed for school and you have two shirts you're choosing from, red or blue, two pants, jeans or khakis, or two different sneakers, Nikes or Adidas, right? So we could use a tree to figure out what the probability was of picking a certain combination, or just to figure out how many possible combinations there are. So the first thing we have to choose is our shirt. It's either going to be red or blue. And then we have to choose our pants. And no matter what shirt we chose, right, our pants are either going to be jeans or khakis, so red and jeans or red and khakis, blue and jeans or blue and khakis. And then finally we have to choose our shoes. And of course then our shoes are either going to be Nike or Adidas, so I've listed those as all of my options as well. And one thing that's nice about our probability tree here is at the end, this list tells us how many options there are. So there are a total of 8 options in the end. And of course, if I wanted to know the chance of getting red jeans with Adidas, that would be one way to get it out of the 8. So each one of these has a 1 in 8 chance of happening. And of course, in addition to a tree, you could also make a table that lists all the possibilities out, and then you can quickly see, all right, so I know that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 possibilities, and each one is equally likely, meaning I have a 1/8 chance of wearing a blue shirt, jeans with my Nike sneakers. So remember that this video was talking about how we could find the probability or how we could organize the outcomes of compound events, and a compound event is when there's more than one event happening at a time. So be sure you have your notes. There's a lot to write on this one, and we'll come into class ready to practice.